Recording. Good afternoon and welcome to the Willamette Women Democrats. My name is Veronica Williams and I have the honor of serving as president of W2D. We are very excited to be welcoming Oregon Speaker of the House, State Representative Dan Rayfield, and the two leading candidates to become Oregon's next Labor Commissioner, Kulla and Christina Stephenson. I'm very glad that you could join us. While COVID-19 appears to be waning, it continues to be present in our communities and places a strain on our hospitals and wonderful healthcare professionals. Accordingly, we will continue to bring you our programs via Zoom through the month of April. We look forward to seeing you again in person in May. A few housekeeping matters. As you have joined us, we have muted your speakers and turned off your videos. We do this to improve the overall quality of the transmission of the program and to help ensure that our speakers will not be interrupted by accidental noises at your end. So unless I specifically call on you, please stay muted and with your videos off. Please feel free to put any questions for our speakers in the chat. After Speaker Rayfield's remarks, we will introduce elected officials and candidates in the room, and then we will hear from our two Labor Commissioner candidates, followed by your questions. We can't begin this program without taking a minute to speak about Ukraine. What we are witnessing is horrific, made even more so by the fact that it is all to satisfy the personal ego of one man to recreate the Russia of the czars. In this modern era of open communication, he is silencing voices within Russia and filling the airwaves with his propaganda and lies. We have seen an imitation of this behavior in our country with the demonization of the press, bold-faced lies about stolen elections, and a revisionist view of a peaceful demonstration at the Capitol on January 6th. You are here today because you care about your community, your state, and your country. Please remind yourself every day that while we have not yet achieved the, quote, more perfect union here in America, what we each do every day can help us continue to move forward towards that goal. I'm now pleased to introduce our program committee chair, Nancy Murray, who will introduce our guest speaker, Dan Rayfield. Nancy?
Good afternoon. Dan Rayfield is our new Speaker of the House, leading his wing of the legislature in a very productive short session that just ended last Friday. He began his political career just 8 years ago and represents Corvallis. From his first term, he dove straight into the intricacies of budget writing and took on the position of Majority Whip in his second term. When not in session, Dan is a leading trial attorney, specialized in consumer and civil rights cases against large corporations and insurance companies, and is a partner in his law firm. That last part means he also owns and operates a small business in addition to practicing law. When not busy working, his spare time is spent with his wife and son, including traveling, cooking, basketball, hiking, and on occasion, performing in local theater. In Oregon, we have a part-time legislature, so our representatives in Salem have other work to pay the bills. They have all grown up in particular families, in different places, one from another, and have had different work and life experiences. As they come together to work in government, part-time or full-time, they each bring a past, a present, and hopes for a better future with their contributions. We at Willamette Women Democrats continue to bring you elected office holders and candidates who all take a risk that their considerable efforts they make to campaign will be worthwhile. It falls to us as voters and residents of our beautiful state to give them the careful attention they deserve. This election season, we chose to include the Office of Labor Commissioner because it's a very important position that gets little public attention. Candidates Casey Kulla and Christina Stephenson will introduce themselves to us later in the program. So welcome all, and we'll begin by hearing from Speaker Dan Rayfield. He will let us get to know him a little better, give us highlights and perhaps any lowlights of the past session. Mr. Speaker.
Well, thank you, Nancy. I always like hearing how people will talk about your bios and these things, because different things get highlighted every time. So thanks for having me. I think the first thing I would say is my favorite state representative is here, former Representative Margaret Doherty. By the way, Margaret and I served together for a really long time. We would sit next to each other in caucus and we would come up with two-person comedic routines. Hey, Margaret, I just thought I'd say hi. And also Diane Rosenbaum, I saw her here. We sat on the campaign finance task force together, and all of us eventually got to vote on the constitutional amendment that we worked very closely together. So, hey, Diane. So I just had to do that. That's just kind of selfish part of the beginning. I thought maybe what I could do is just tell you a little bit about myself. I actually was from Rep. Doherty's neck of the woods. I went to high school in Tigard, so up in Washington County. I was a horrible student, and I barely graduated. I had to take summer classes. In fact, I was a criminal defendant in the Washington County court house on occasions. I've been arrested several times as a youth. And, you know, I like to say that I kind of found my maturity when I eventually became a Jungle Cruise skipper at Walt Disney World, where I told really bad jokes and, you know, with puns, right? So for instance, we could say, let's say Christina Stephenson she's on the back of the Jungle Cruise boat and she's helping to load people on, and I'm the Jungle Cruise skipper. I would say, there's Christina. She just keeps loading more on and more on and more on. And then it would say, Casey, what do we call her? And then Casey would respond. It was like, oh, and I apologize, Christina, she's a moron. And I would say, absolutely not. She's not a moron. She's a loader, but she works for free. So we call her a freeloader. So those are the type of jokes that I would tell for several months until eventually I was actually fired from that job because my jokes were so bad. And then my maturity kicked in. I went to community college, which is frankly where you know, I had failed out of college. It is, and you're thinking, this person runs our state. This person, what have they done in Salem? So I ended up going back to school, and that's where, frankly, it was a professor of geography that really kind of turned kind of my focus in life around. I became wanted to be an urban planner or a lawyer at that point, and eventually worked my way up, got my first 4.0 ever in community college. And it was this slow process of rebuilding a sense of confidence, where eventually I went to Willamette University Law School, and then just kind of fell in love with the mid-Willamette Valley area. And so I live in Corvallis. And if you haven't lived there, it's the best city in the state, in my personal opinion. You can bike everywhere. It's a very low key, and just the people are wonderful down here. It's kind of a bubble in the state of Oregon, in my opinion. And I was fortunate enough to actually run for the state legislature. What was it, in 2010? And I lost my first race. And that was probably one of the most meaningful races that I participated in. I think, you know, at the time it was Senator Rosenbaum, I think came down and knocked on doors for me. And then shortly after that, in 2014, that's when I ran for the legislature. And as you mentioned, you know, kind of my background was known in budgeting, and then was fortunate to be able to step into this role with very short notice prior to the legislative session. And so and maybe we can just kind of transition into kind of the session dynamics as we kind of walk through. I think if you all were to put yourself in the shoes of legislators over the last 2 years, what you would see is it's been constantly almost a full-time job reacting to the multitude of crises that we've been facing, right? Some of them pre-existing that are just exacerbated by the pandemic, right? For whether that's, you know, wealth inequality to our housing crisis. We had wildfire crisis, and it was what we call special session after special session, long sessions dealing with the issues that, frankly, I think all of us can see, touch, feel in our communities. And so we wind up in leading up to this 22 special session where people are exhausted, right? Whether it's in our communities or whether you're a legislator, people are struggling. And so the gravity of the session leading up to it is pretty immense. And so there was a focus of what we wanted to accomplish. And then you had a leadership transition, frankly. You have your majority leader in the House who steps down. You have your Speaker of the House who steps down. And we wind up, and I think we were very fortunate to have folks like Leader Fahey and a caucus that kind of came together into this session where we really honed in on the things that we needed to accomplish, right? Which is trying to give our teachers in schools the supports that they need for retention, recruitment, to make sure our kids can stay in school 5 days a week. Really wanted to focus and make sure we make positive traction on the housing and homelessness crisis that we all see. There's the national trend, of community violence, community safety. We needed to really emphasize and focus on that. How do you break the cycle of violence where we're not reactive on the back end, right? But we're really focused on the front end. And so we had investment packages there. All of us know cost of living is real. There are increases there, and we wanted to put checks in the hands of people who need it the most, Oregonians, low-income Oregonians, so that they can get kind of that bridge to kind of get through this period of time. And then, frankly, you think about childcare, right? Whether you're a working family, a parent, we've seen an exodus of childcare, and we needed to facilitate and create an environment that actually where we can have resources for folks to get into childcare, supporting the frontline workers that are providing childcare, and then, frankly, also on the supports for the parents who need it and the kids who need it. So you see this really broad scope of things that we were really trying to work on in this session. And the question is, how the heck do you get all of that accomplished in 35 days? And then what I would also say is, in a short session, a lot of those decisions have to be made well in advance. So as a body, as we came in, it was like, these are the things that people expect us to do. And then at the same time, we also wanted to lower the temperature and the partisanship within the legislature at the same time. And that really was focused on how do you build relationships with, especially you have a minority leader on both the Senate and in the House, which were relatively new in those roles. And I think we were very fortunate to come in, change some of those dynamics, make significant progress on a lot of these issues, and then get out in record time, where a lot of you probably remember the last short session, 2020, 3 bills passed. 3. And then we walked out, and it was within a week, we were back in an e-board talking about, well, hey, there's this pandemic, we think, right? And at the time we allocated $5 million because we thought that that's all that we would need. One of the questions in the e-board was, do you think $5 million is enough for the pandemic? And the Oregon Health Authority said, yeah, that should cover it. So little did we know at that point how things would transform. So to be able to come into the session with new leadership, the positivity that resulted from this session was just an immense sense of accomplishment, I think, for all House Democrats and all Senate Democrats, and hopefully as well for the minority party in the House and the Senate. So I'll keep my comments right there, and hopefully maybe there's some questions. But happy to check in on anything.
Veronica, you're muted.
Excuse me. I was being good because I was making noise at my end, so I didn't want to disrupt you. So thanks, Dan. We're going to take questions in a little bit, but right now I would like to recognize some of the people in the room, even though Dan beat me to it with a few of them. So hopefully I have everybody. Some people don't have their full names on there, and I know they've registered, but I don't see them in the room. So I would like to recognize and welcome Senator Rob Wagner, who is joining us. As mentioned, former State Senator Diane Rosenbaum, and former Representative Margaret Doherty. We also have Tualatin City Councilors Bridget Brooks and Valerie Pratt. Candidate for Clackamas County Clerk, Catherine McMullen is here. And if there is someone else who I have missed, would you please raise your hand? Because I may not be able to recognize you from your name. So you can go to the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and raise your hand. And
Jody Weiser is here. Jody is a frequent flyer in the Capitol. In 2010, when I was running for the state Senate, she met with me when I was running, and then I asked her for a contribution and she said no. All of you should know I have a terrible sense of humor, and so you have to apologize. Jody, I love her to death. She's amazing and does wonderful work in the Capitol.
okay, at this point, we're going to move on and we're going to talk a little bit about the labor commissioner. And so the job is actually the head of the Bureau of Labor and Industry, referred to as BOLI, but we always shorten it and just call it the labor commissioner because the rest is too darn long. And basically, it has a very interesting
I'm on
collection
a Zoom
of
meeting,
tasks.
so I can't talk now. I'm running it.
You're being heard.
Okay, bye.
You need to mute Patricia, please. The responsibility is to protect the rights of workers and individuals to equal non-discriminatory treatment through the enforcement of anti-discrimination laws that apply to workplaces, housing, and public accommodations. It's to encourage and enforce compliance with state laws relating to wages, hours, terms, and conditions of employment, to educate and train employers to understand and comply with both wage and hour and civil rights law. So BOLI is the major enforcement of civil rights in the state of Oregon, which a lot of people do not realize. And to promote the development of a highly skilled competitive workforce in Oregon through the apprenticeship program and through partnerships with government, labor, business, and educational institutions. So with that kind of high-level background, we're going to turn it over to our candidates. First, Casey Kulla, and then Christina Stephenson. So Casey, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much. Whoa. You get that? Yeah. Thank you very much. It's a great start. And it's also kind of intimidating to go after the Speaker of the House. So I want to say one thing very specifically about the Speaker is that I feel like this was Speaker said it was successful and it lowered the temperature. And out here in rural Oregon, we can see that and feel that too. So you're on it. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And I'll get kind of emotional if I'm too careful. So while you might have bad humor and you're known for it, I'm known for like getting the tears. So we'll go with this. All right. So for all of you, I'm going to do a little bit of audience participation. And so you know where your digital hand is, right? Okay. I'm just going to assume you do. Speaker does. All right. So raise your digital hand if you know the answer. If you know where to go when you discover that your mother is being harmed in a nursing home, raise your digital hand. All right, Speaker's trying to figure this out. All right, great. So that would be the long-term care advocate or ombuds at Oregon Department of Human Services. All right, you can put your hand down. All right, now raise your hand so you have to put it down and then put it back up again. You know, we're gonna have fun. Raise your hand if you know where to go if my employer doesn't provide me respirators while I'm working with asbestos. Yeah, y'all are so good. Keep doing it, but I'll tell you that it's OSHA. All right, you can put them back down again. Now, raise your hand if you find that your neighbor is harassing you because you're Jewish. Who do you reach out to at the state? Raise your hand. All right, a little slower, but I will say that it's the DOJ, Department of Justice Bias Crimes Hotline, which thanks to all of you who've got that for us. All right, put them down. Now raise them again if you know where to go, if your employer laid you off because of your age. Yeah, look at those hands go up. This is so fun. Thank you for participating. That would be the Bureau of Labor and Industries. All right, so put them down again. You're great. Now, what about if, like in the Amazon warehouse in Bessemer, Alabama, you find that your union formation vote is being manipulated by your employer? You want to raise your hand? Speaker is thinking about it, I will say. All right, that's the Employment Relations Board. So you can put it down now. Oh, that was so fun. Thank you very much. So I hope that your participation, you got a sense, you saw something, which is that there's an assortment of agencies in the state, and they're all tasked with some part of educating and mediating and enforcing Oregon laws on safety, civil rights, and worker rights. And just as a policy statement, so that because the speaker is here, I want to say that I don't think that anybody should have to know where to go. I really believe it's the responsibility of state agencies to communicate clearly to the public so that they know where to go. And it's not really up to knowing where to go, that if they come to the state with a problem, that we will solve it, we will investigate it. And as we heard, BOLI's responsibility in that galaxy of agencies is to educate, investigate, and enforce civil rights in the workplace, in public accommodation, public spaces, and in housing, and to register and supervise apprenticeships. And I will say that I am running for labor commissioner to educate people about their rights, like we did just now, and so that you know where to go when your rights have been violated. And I'm running for labor commissioner to ensure that we have an independent, fully staffed, responsive civil rights agency that's capable of enforcing those civil rights. And I'm running for labor commissioner to work with all of you and unions and accrediting boards and community organizations to expand apprenticeships, and also to support apprentices with things like childcare, which, thank you, Speaker, Future Ready Oregon. Well done. And who am I that I can do this? I'm a Yamhill County Commissioner. Let's do this real quick. Raise your hand if you know what a county commissioner does. I'm only seeing a few hands, but we'll get into that later. All right, good job. So it means I know how to run a responsible, responsive government agency, and I know how to work with labor and business and management and the public. And I make hard decisions every day. And I do that with, frankly, a conservative majority on my board of commissioners. And I've also been a farmer and a worker and a manager and a business owner. And that means I know how to work with businesses to get them to their responsibilities. And I know what it's like for workers to not feel safe or human on the job. And I worked as a plumber's assistant to pay my way through college. So I know the value of high skill, high wage pathways. And it's personal too, because I'm a father of two. And I want my children to have a really solid future in this community, in this beautiful state. So with that, I look forward to talking with all of you. And I also really look forward to being here with Christina Stephenson. We've been on the same campaign path for a little while now, and I'm really honored to be with her. So thank you all.
Thanks, Casey. Christina, floor is yours.
Great. It's so good to be with you all today. You know, many of you here already know me from the work that we've done together to make Oregon stronger. But for those of you who don't know me, my name is Christina Stephenson, and I'm running to be your next labor commissioner. And if you don't know me, the first thing you should know about me is I'm a mom. I'm a mom who started my company at my kitchen table when my son was just 3 months old, and when the economy was rough. I know what it takes to make payroll every month. The salary, the taxes, the benefits, whether it's March of 2020 or the end of a banner year, I know what it means to pay my employees before I pay myself. You know, before I go and buy William Pokemon cards, before I go, poke around a bookstore, before I go to and pay for science camp. I hold up my end of the bargain. I fulfill the promise that I made to my employees when they put their faith in me. And that's just it. Employers make a promise that before anything else, they'll uphold, at the very least, the laws protected by the Bureau of the Labor and Industries. And you would think that wouldn't be a problem. Now, what we do at this small little business of mine is we fight bad guys. Mostly we fight greedy bad guys when they're breaking the laws enshrined by the Oregon Bureau of Labor and Industries. We hold them accountable, we help them correct course, and we get workers what they're owed. I have represented hundreds of Oregonians throughout this state in cases of wage theft, discrimination, retaliation. That looks like someone's pay stub missing the overtime they're owed. That's workplace harassment, unsafe working conditions. And that looks like went toe-to-toe with Wells Fargo. We took on one of Wall Street's biggest banks and their army of lawyers, and we won in court. We won because the law was on our side, and we can never take that for granted. That is why this race is so important. So at its core, the Labor Commissioner's job is to make sure that all the workers, employers, the dreamers, the side hustlers who make our economy run have someone in their corner, someone who wants them to win. I'm running for Labor Commissioner because I fundamentally believe that Oregon should be the best place to live and work in this country. And because right now, we actually have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to say the thousands of Oregonians who've left terrible jobs during this pandemic, we see you. And we can connect you to a career path that is actually fulfilling, to the skills you need to get ahead, to apprenticeships that are accessible, to high skill industries where the worker shortages are actually worker crises right now. Healthcare, education, construction, high-tech manufacturing. We have the blueprints from our great union apprenticeships, and we don't have to wait. We don't have to wait for the next Fed report, the next buzzword. I mean, work has changed. It is no coincidence that right now, unions are at their most popular. Our workforce is ready, our industries are ready, and I'm ready to start skilling up, giving our homegrown talent a reason to stay here in Oregon. And you can be damn sure that I'm ready to enforce the laws that protect them when they're at work. This is a race about how we are going to do business and treat our workers in Oregon. I am proud to have the support of the last 5 labor commissioners. And when I'm Bully Commissioner, together, we're going to train the workforce of the future through innovative apprenticeship programs. We're going to enforce the laws of our state. We're going to stand up for workers and hold employers accountable when they break the laws. We're going to empower businesses, do the right thing, educate them on how to comply with the law. Because no matter what industry you're a part of in Oregon, technology, ranching, construction, healthcare, Oregon makes a promise to you. If you work hard and you play by the rules, someone's looking out for you. And it would be the honor of my life to uphold that promise to you as Oregon's next labor commissioner.
Thank you, Christina. Before we get to questions, I do want to welcome Neelan Gupta, who has joined us. She is a candidate, one of 2 for House District 38. So for those of you who live in that district, she is joining us. So some questions. I'm actually going to go to, some of these are for Dan first. So I have a couple ones, some are specific and some not so, but this one is my pet peeve. So I'm going to ask you, Dan, what do we need to do to get the legislature to be able to pass a fair wage, since we're talking about wages, for the legislators? We lost at least 3 outstanding legislators because they cannot afford to continue. And Rachel Pruzak happens to be my legislator, and I'm going to miss her dearly. And I will also say that, as you very well know, Karen Powers is probably one of the, if not the expert in the House on all matters related to climate and the industries and clean fuel and air and water, and has done years of work in that area. And that experience and knowledge in working with those groups just can't be replaced. So what do we do, Dan?
It's a really good question. And this is not a new one. This has, you'll hear often people talk about, well, we need term limits in the legislature and Congress. And the reality is we turn over in the Oregon House. at least 1/3, if not more, of the legislators every 2 years. And part of that is, if you are, in your, say, your mid-30s, are you going to go serve in the legislature? You're in the prime earning years of your life. You don't have retirement and you're making not, a small wage relative to what you could be making, in your private life. If you choose to have a family, it becomes even more challenging. There's these stack on top of each other, and has been that way for a long time. Now, what's the reality of trying to do something? In this last legislative session, you didn't have the votes to do it. And it was something that came to life at the very end of the session. And it was one bill that was talked about. And so you're stuck in this place. And what I want you to do for a moment is think about if you are a minority leader, and put your politics hat on, because this is what really happens behind the scenes. When you have a legislator pay bill, when you do the polling, it polls as bad as a sales tax, right? And so as you are sitting there as a minority leader, what is the best thing that you can do if you're going to play politics? You lock your entire caucus down. Right. So if you're in this situation, and Democrats will do this in Republican states too, right? These are games that get played, but they are just that. They are games. And it's not really, legislating by your values, right? Because this also has equity implications in the people that serve in our legislature. It's much bigger than what the conversation that we're having here today. And so what ends up happening is the minority caucus is locked down to force as many in Oregon, Democrats to take that vote, which puts them politically at risk, which then causes, in what happened in this last session, you have vote issues, because frankly, not all Democrats feel the same way about these things. So that's really what happened in the session, and the dynamic, and frankly, not just this session, but many sessions in the past. And so the real question that you're asking, Veronica, is how do we do this? Because it's an absolute need, but it's not just the legislature. Right? Did you know that the Bureau of Labor and Industry gets paid $77,000 a year, just for what it's worth? Shocker for Casey and Christina. But the the reality of that is an agency head. And they are grossly underpaid for what they do. And how do you continue to recruit people, right? You think about our judges. There are a handful of elected officials. And so I think there is a way for us to frankly create a policy that removes the politics. So whether you do a constitutional amendment to create a commission that makes recommendations that can be vetoed by the legislature in terms of compensation for elected officials that are based upon certain things. So that way you take the politics out of it, where legislators aren't voting to increase their salary. And so you can find bipartisan support for doing what I would say is a values-based proposition to improve the strength of the body in our legislative branch, the strength of the people running in statewide races, and frankly, in those roles, and we move forward. But I think that is not the end of the conversation. We need to look at campaign finance reform, right? We need to look at public financing and campaigns, removing money from how we elect folks. I think there are other structural ways that we can improve our democracy that in the moment feel good, but frankly, the ripple impacts of the decision-making that will go on and the strength of the folks serving in those roles will pay dividends for decades into the future. And so I think, and so you say, what are we going to do collectively as our office? My hope is when we come into 23, the plan is to actually have some good governance reforms that are really meant to structurally improve the strength of our democracy as a whole, and try and get those passed in the upcoming session. Legislator pay and thinking about that holistically would be one of those.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to kind of move the questions around so everybody has a chance to talk about different things. So one of the questions for Casey and Christina is, and we'll start with Christina first. What have you learned through campaigning for this office that you did not anticipate? Christina, did you hear me? Oh, there you go. Okay.
Sorry about that. Yes. One of the things I would say I did not anticipate is really, I mean, honestly, how many opportunities there are in this office, right? Because I've spent my career, I mean, I've got BOLI on speed dial. You know, I worked with the Bureau a lot, but the real exciting thing for us is the career pathways, the opportunities that we have to get folks into sustainable family wage jobs. You know, we can diversify our workforce and create a pathway. And that is, you know, as someone who's the first person who, you know, went to college in my family, you know, I know that that was, you know, kind of a part of a narrative during when I was growing up, is like, this is the path. And I think we have a really exciting opportunity to be giving our kiddos a lot of different paths, you know, by focusing on our partnerships at the school level with our CTE. You know, we know that kids that are involved in CTE do better in school no matter what career path they take. And then we can get them into pre-apprenticeship programs and apprenticeship programs into, you know, family wage jobs. So that has been an exciting part of the opportunities of this position.
Casey?
Yeah, and thank you, Christina. It is a very exciting thing. So I want to. I think that the most surprising thing to me was how many people are so excited about this race. You know, our campaign does a lot of voter contact. We're at 500,000 at this point, connections. And each time it's like, wow, people really want to know about this, and they really want us to do something about protecting their civil rights. So kudos really to Christina and to Speaker Rayfield for doing that work on a daily basis. But I'd say the thing that's been most shocking to me, frankly, was hearing, sitting around a table the other day and hearing from very experienced union leadership saying over and over again that BOLI is broken. And that was very disturbing to me. You know, I see it. So as a Yamhill County Commissioner, like all employers, large employers, we see, we go to BOLI, right? We have staff, we work with BOLI regularly. And so we see a particular view of BOLI, but to hear very clearly from people shaking their heads and nodding that they felt like BOLI was broken is a very concerning thing to me, and one that we should all be concerned about.
Thank you. Dan, I have a question for you. So I've always thought that being the whip in the House was a great learning experience for leadership, because it takes a lot of special skills. And I'm going to guess that most people on this call have no idea what the majority whip does. And so will you describe it very briefly and then talk about what you learned from that?
That's such a wonky question, Veronica.
But it's important.
You know, speaking again to the high turnover in the legislature, when I came out of the 2015 session, we have leadership elections, and so that's where I was elected, was into the majority whip spot. And one of there's two roles about being in leadership, right? There's the campaign side, right? About, you know, our being in a safe seat where I am, you know, if I want to see my values reflected in the legislation we passed, I have to help elect other Democrats. That's just part of being in leadership. Then there's the in-session component of being a whip, which is the other, you know, frankly, the intricate policy side of what goes on. And it works differently in the Senate than it does in the House. So what I'm going to talk about is just for the House side of being a whip. We came in, and I think I was in a position where we fluctuated anywhere from 35 to 30 Democrats. And so the first thing that I did in a policy position, all of you might remember the minimum wage bill that passed in the 2016 legislative session. Speaker Kotek at the time had said, all right, Dan, you got to go count that bill. And what that is there's different types of counting. Sometimes we're in a position, and this was in a short session, but sometimes we're in a position where a bill is going to move out of committee. We need to know if we have the votes to pass the bill. So you have to have the relationships with individuals. You have to have the trust with people where they can feel that they can confidentially tell you how they feel about a bill. And then we rely upon that vote count on whether to move a bill in or out of committee. And in the case of minimum wage, sometimes we count things a little bit differently, where it is, and we'll have a caucus conversation about a bill, but sometimes people, again, don't feel necessarily comfortable always talking about their feelings in caucus. So the whip, through the trust, through those things, will talk to everybody. And on that minimum wage bill and how this worked was we really started to learn that the caucus was okay with passing a minimum wage bill, but they wanted it tiered. Which is why you now have a tiered minimum wage system in Oregon, based upon the way that count was done as we tried to find the votes to really lift the minimum wage up here in Oregon. So you're working on that. The other wonky thing that you do is in the back of a floor, you're also managing the floor sessions. So I would sit and stand in the very back, and probably Margaret Doherty remembers this because she would always come back and say, like her fun comments that they're more than fun. You have to get me outside of the Zoom and I'll disclose all of the fun that we had. But we would sit there and I would work with the speaker at that time to make sure that you have to know where everybody is. When a vote comes down, you got to make sure that your members are on the floor. If someone is off, and people, it's like herding kittens sometimes. They will just run all over the members will just leave the floor or come back because they don't know how long a debate is going. So before the speaker, pulls the gavel down or calls for the vote, because you only have 30 seconds to vote and be within the chamber, you have to make sure everyone is nearby and knowing where they are to make sure that the bills pass. So that is another important component. And frankly, there's some times where you don't have the votes on a given bill. And you have to be able to have the trust to be able to then talk to those members and say, hey, is it okay if I disclose that you are a no on this bill? And then at that point, it provides information to the policymakers who are really point on those to then how do they adjust those bills? So that's just a really brief overview, or maybe it wasn't brief, but an overview of what the whip does.
Thank you. Well, I think, to me, I know it's a wonky question, but I think it really gives an individual the opportunity to develop really one-on-one relationships in a deeper way than doesn't necessarily happen when you're just a member of a caucus or a body. And that's why I think it's such an important step for leadership, because it helps leadership it helps you understand the different places that people are coming from, because you've had those conversations over and over again, so that when you're bringing up a big issue, you already kind of know who's going to be all in and who might be a little wary. And I just think it helps. I think it's a great training ground, I guess is what I would say.
One of the other things, Veronica, that I would say that's very interesting is knocking in different people's districts. So when you go knock on doors in Coos Bay versus East Portland, you start to understand why those representatives feel the way they do, right? And so that is also, I think, a really important component of just understanding the people you work with, right?
So back to Casey and Christina. We'll start with you, Casey, first, but Christina alluded to this somewhat. I'm not an expert on it, but I know we just passed some major legislation that's putting money towards apprenticeships and other workforce development. I know that starting when Brad Avakian was labor commissioner, he started doing a lot of work to try and get career education back into the high schools. So would both of you talk a little bit about what we need to be doing in our state to really strengthen and lift up career education, especially I know right now that there is a shortage of electricians, there's a shortage of plumbers, people have trouble getting, folks out to do work. So this is, and the average age of most of the people in our trades is up there. So let's talk about that for a minute. Do you want to start with that one, Christina, and then we'll go to Casey?
And Veronica, I'd note that there's also a question in the chat too.
Okay, we'll get there. On that one, Christina, go ahead.
So it's true, we have a workforce crisis in a lot of our industries. And I think that that is the opportunity for us to develop these strong partnerships first with our education professionals and get CTE back in the classroom. And it's also our pre-apprenticeship program. So these are kiddos that are 16 and 17 that are going to get the skills they need so that they can get straight into an apprenticeship program. So the goal is that once they're getting out of high school, that they already have the skills that match up seamlessly with our apprenticeship programs and getting them. And of course, we have really robust programs in the building trades and others, but we're expanding those to, CNAs, mental health professionals, high-tech industries. So we have a lot of opportunities to be getting the word out. And I think that that's a really great role for the Labor Commissioner, is to be developing those partnerships and kind of ringing the bell that this is where we need to go. And frankly, this is something where we're going to have to have our be hitting the pavement to make these connections with our schools and let them know the benefits they see. And like I said before, it's not just the benefits of the career pathway. No matter the pathway our kiddos choose, CTE is an important part of keeping them engaged, and they have better outcomes.
Casey?
Yeah, and thank you. I would say that, as you might imagine from our testimony already, Christina and I have a similar policy direction in this regard. But so the Future Ready Oregon, thank you, Speaker, again, set aside $200 million for very quick, and we're trying to get this money out the door. So really before we're in the office, it's going to be in place. $200 million for both expanding apprenticeships, supporting apprentices, and doing the critical work of getting communities of color, Oregonians of color, and women into high skills, high wage work. So it's a fast turnaround time project, but it's also going to be long-term. And I hope, Speaker, I'm speaking to you right now, this is going to be long-term. This is a down payment on an investment. I do want to note that this is also, and listen closely, please, this is also the opportunity to really, as a state, rethink how we pay for post-high school education and training. And that's because right now, the state of Oregon has said, we value this kind of work, so we're going to pay you to do the training for it. And I want to see us, and I hope that you're on board with this as Democrats. I hope you're on board with extending this to community college and then extending this to a public education at a public university. I'm really excited to be part of this. So part of the basic experience with this is that I serve on the Willamette Workforce Partnership, which is the state, or it's the regional entity that spends state and federal money doing workforce training. And I can tell you, it is hard to do training. It's hard to identify people. It's hard to get them connected with jobs. It's hard to get them to completion. So I want you all to know that this is not going to be a fast pathway. And Christina alluded to it, that it's going to take time from middle school up through all of you older people in order to actually change how we view education and the pathways that are open to people. So this is a big thing, and we're starting right now, and we need to start right now.
Thank you. So I actually have a question that's for everyone. It is in the chat if you want to read it in its exact wording. I am going to modify it somewhat. But the basic question relates to workplace harassment and sexual harassment. The perception that has been tolerated at times in the legislature, and also the issue of what is the role of BOLI. I don't, since you're kind of an executive agency, I don't know, you can cross over into a legislative agency, but it certainly is an issue in other workplaces too. So We'll start with you, Dan, and then we'll go to Casey and then Christina.
In some ways, it's a little bit of an easy question, is that there should be no tolerance for workplace harassment or sexual harassment of any kind in any workplace, let alone the legislature. And so that, I think, is just a real easy component of this. The question is, what we have done is we've created a conduct committee in the state legislature to be able to, frankly, have independent investigations that look into these various allegations. And in fact, the process was created in I think it was in partnership with some advice from BOLI and the Oregon Law Commission, if I remember correctly, which created what we have today. I will tell you that I think that there's improvement that can always be made. To think that we got the conduct process correct right out of the gates would be surprising, right? I mean, we have to look at it and see how it has performed. And we've had some examples over the past, frankly, year, 2 years, where we can look at that and say, okay, let's figure out how to make this better. And that's something that I am hopeful in the next upcoming year or two, that frankly, both the majority party and the minority party can get together to sit there and say, all right, these are outcomes that where we have a value set that we can all agree upon. We don't want it politicized, and we want it to be factual. But the interesting dynamic of this is legislators can be the only ones to, frankly, I don't want to say punish or hold other legislators accountable. Outside of legislators, you have other workplace. There's a ton of people that work in the Capitol, from lobbyists to folks that in the legislators' offices, and those folks need a safe workplace to exist in as well. And we just need to make sure that the systems and structures are in place to accomplish that.
Thanks. Casey?
Yeah, so it's good to hear that, Speaker Rayfield. And I read the settlement agreement between Commissioner Hoyle and the House leadership. And I just want to note that if the way that the settlement reads is that if leadership isn't performing the job successfully of the settlement agreement, that the labor commissioner can and will enforce. But I also I want to step in and say that, we have a responsibility to the people of Oregon, regardless of who they are or where they work, to uphold their civil rights. And as a Yamhill County Commissioner in a nonpartisan executive leadership role, unfortunately, we see our own elected officials sometimes creating hostile work environments. And if you know anything about Yamhill County, it won't surprise you, unfortunately, our leadership. But in that case, we have learned that staff at a county, because it's an elected official, have very little recourse right now. And we need to change that. It is incredibly dispiriting, incredibly demoralizing, especially for somebody who's come forward and said, I am a victim here. You need to help me, to say we don't have anything we can do for you. So that needs to change. Frankly, it needs to change. And at BOLI, we also have had, BOLI has had problems as well. And if you've read the report, the investigative report, you will know that BOLI also needs to make internal changes to be a safe workplace for everybody.
Christina?
So I take these issues really seriously, and I'm going to take the same approach, whether you work in the grocery store or a government building, and just to give you a sense, I'm a civil rights attorney, but what I do every day is I take cases for free for folks like Martha. This isn't her real name. I'm protecting her privacy, but Martha was a custodian at a large institution making just above minimum wage. But the main benefit of her job was that her kids could go to college for free as long as she worked there. Martha's supervisor knew about this, knew she wanted her kids to go to college, and it would be otherwise out of reach. And he told her, if you want to keep your job, you're going to have to submit to my sexual harassment and keep your mouth shut. I took on Martha's case. Turns out she was not alone. Her supervisor was a serial harasser. He'd actually sexually assaulted one of her coworkers using the same threat of termination and the loss of college for her kids to keep her quiet. I got involved. I represented both of those survivors. We worked for years, but we held that very powerful institution accountable. And that supervisor was finally fired. But when that case was over, I wasn't done. Not only did I fight for Martha and her coworker, but next I worked to pass a landmark law, the Oregon Workplace Fairness Act, this applies to private and public employers, no matter who you are. This is a law designed to make it easier to hold harassers like this accountable. I drafted and passed this law, and now as labor commissioner, I'm going to be the one enforcing these laws. And you can bet that I'm going to be using every tool in the toolbox to protect Oregon's working people.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's see, we had a question for Dan. From Jody, so you doesn't surprise you probably saw it in the chat already, but she asked, to deal with wealth inequality, what do you see as the best balance between services for the lower income folks and taxes for the wealthy folks? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's different ways to tackle this, right? One of the things that, I think I'm a big proponent of is a progressive tax structure. And we have and I think Jody, and by the way, when Jody comes to the legislature, her whole focus is on tax fairness and really, and so she's a wonderful resource, frankly, if you all haven't worked with her, and really focusing on how do we create a more progressive tax structure within Oregon. And what that really means is looking at the people who are doing really well, and then looking at how do we redistribute that in a more balanced and equitable fashion. The other thing that I think we can do, which goes often underappreciated, is take different workforces and elevate them. The workforces that I'd like you to think about would be childcare. Think about frontline workers and intellectual developmental disability, assisted living facilities, right? These are workforces that, frankly, we get federal match dollars on. As you begin to take these workforces, which are, predominantly women of color, right? And we actually uplift them into family wage job with retirement, benefits, the ability for these folks to take vacation, to save for if they have children, if those children want to go to college. If you can uplift that, the amount of investment on the state level combined with the federal match dollars can really make a meaningful difference, not only just in those individuals' lives, but that ripples out into the community as well. And I think that's the type of opportunity that we have to really start uplifting communities within Oregon. And some of that stuff starts with reforming our tax structures, making it more progressive as we start looking at things down the road.
Thank you. I think we're just about out of time. So I want to thank Dan and Christina and Casey. Christina and Casey, we wish you all the best. I will point out to people that this race is actually important for a variety of reasons. Not only do we need to elect someone who will do a good job in the race, but we need enough people to focus on it so that we can get one of these people over 50% of the vote, so they do not have to continue on running into November when we're all in the middle of a governor's race and other important races and Congressional District 6 races for people like me and what have you. So this is an important race. Please chat with your friends who are not paying attention to this much at all, I'm sure. And tell them this is an important race and to get informed, to pay attention, and to please be sure to vote. Both Casey and Christina have put links in the chat. So if you want to find out more about them, go to their websites, share it with your friends. I really encourage you both to do that. And Dan, I will just give you an early invite to our meeting in January, when we love to have the Speaker of the House come back and tell us what is on the docket for the long session. So we're looking forward to seeing you again, and welcome to your first time at Willamette Women Dems. So
yeah, thanks for
having you. I have a few announcements, so I do hope you'll stay on for just a sec for these. First of all, on April the 9th, which is a Saturday at 11 o'clock, the Washington County Democrats will be hosting a governor's forum with candidates Tina Kotek and Tobias Reed. This is a moderated forum by Dana Haynes, who is the managing editor at Pamplin Media, excuse me. Tickets go on sale March 16th. They're $20. They'll be available on the Washington County Democrats website. That's washcodems, all one word, .org. And the program will be on Zoom. So you can, make yourself a nice breakfast, have a cup of coffee, be in your pajamas, and get a really good chance to listen. The moderated program will be about 45 minutes long. So we should get to a far-ranging conversation with both of them. We look forward to seeing you all back on Zoom in April, when we will continue our series of programs looking at some of the critical nonpartisan races coming up this May. We have invited a number of leading candidates for the county commission positions in Clackamas, Multnomah, and Washington County, as well as Brian Decker, who is running for the very important district attorney position in Washington County. So please watch for our program announcement a little bit later this month with all the details. Also in April, we will be announcing candidates for nonpartisan races that the board is endorsing for races being contested in May. We hope to be able to contribute to some of these campaigns from W2D's PAC. So if you have not done so already and would like to contribute to the PAC, you can go to our website, W2D's.com, and make a contribution to the PAC to support this important work. Just scroll down on the main page and you'll see where the link is for that. I want to thank you all for joining us. Be sure you are fully vaccinated, boosted, follow health and safety guidance, and stay well. And we look forward to seeing you all in April. Good night, everyone.